Hello, my name is Felipe Souza, and today I will be talking to you about neurons and electric signals. The basics. What is a neuron? A neuron is a cell that is specialized to transmit an electric signal from one part of the body to another. There are three specific types of neurons: sensory or afferent neurons that convey information about the environment from a specialized receptor cell in the sense organs to the brain. Motor neurons, also known as efferent neurons, convey information to the muscles and glands of the body. And, last but not least, interneurons, who connect all neurons to each other and create a neural network. Neuron breakdown. The basic breakdown of a neuron is just like any other cell. It contains a cell body, which contains the nucleus and genetic material, and apart from those, it contains dendrites, who receive messages from other neurons. The axon, who transmits the messages to other neurons through the axon terminal. The myelin sheath, which insulates the axon and increases the communication speed. The nodes of Ranvier, which are the gaps in the myelin sheath that allow signals to pass faster. And the synapse, which is the gap between the axon terminal and the dendrite of another neuron, and also the area where the transfer of neurotransmitters occurs. Action potential and the neural pathway. A neuron in homeostasis is usually at resting potential, which is negative 70 millivolts. When the concentration of positive ions, which are inside the cell, is greater than the concentration of negative ions, which are outside the cell, and the sodium-potassium pump opens, that causes an electrical charge. If the neuron reaches threshold potential, which can range anywhere from negative 55 millivolts to negative 65 millivolts, there is an increasingly high chance that an action potential will happen. An action potential, or when the neuron reaches a charge of plus 40 millivolts, is caused by the depolarization of the neuron and the influx of electrically charged ions into the cell. After it fires, the neuron goes into its refractory period, which is at negative 90 millivolts, and it cannot return to another action potential unless it waits for another few seconds. Dendrites are the receiving end of the neuron. They receive either excitatory, which tends to make the neuron fire, or inhibitory, which tends to make the neuron stop firing. Those two signals are what determines the action potential. Whether a neuron fires or not is dependent on the balance of how excitatory and inhibitory signals that the dendrites receive are put aside. Axon. The axon is the longest part of the neuron that transmits the message to another neuron. It rises from the cell body in an area called the axon hillock. It contains the myelin sheath, the Schwann cells, and the axon terminal. And those axon terminals contain the neurotransmitters, which are molecules that transfer the signal through the synaptic gap and to the other neuron that is across the synaptic cleft. Now, the synapse itself is the site at which information is carried from the first neuron, or the presynaptic neuron, to the target neuron, the postsynaptic neuron. Neurotransmitters are sent to other neurons to the synaptic cleft, which is the gap between the two. They contain vesicles, which are sacs filled when neurotransmitters are going to bind to the postsynaptic neuron on the other side.